The carriage wheels groaned against the frozen mud as Elise Thornwood clutched her worn leather case closer to her chest. The Carpathian Mountains rose around her like the teeth of some ancient beast, their peaks swallowed by clouds that promised snow. She had left London 3 weeks ago, each mile taking her further from the life that had broken her, further from the pitying glances and whispered judgments that followed a childless widow through drawing rooms and markets alike. The driver had not spoken since they crossed into Transylvania. He was a local man, his face weathered and suspicious, and when she had asked him about Castle Dracula, he had made the sign of the cross and spat into the dirt. That should have warned her. That should have sent her back to the inn at Bistritz, back to England, back to anywhere but here. But Elise had nowhere left to go. Her husband's debts had consumed everything. Her body had failed at its most fundamental purpose. She was 28 years old and already a ghost in her own life. The castle appeared suddenly through a break in the mist, perched on a cliff face like a bird of prey watching the valley below. Its towers were black against the grey sky, its windows dark and hollow. No smoke rose from its chimneys, no lights burned in welcome. It looked less like a home than a monument to something long dead. The carriage stopped at the base of a stone stairway that climbed steeply toward the main gate. The driver would not meet her eyes as he handed down her trunk. He thrust an envelope into her hands, the paper yellowed and sealed with black wax, then climbed back onto his seat and whipped the horses into motion. Within moments, he had disappeared back down the mountain road, leaving Elise alone with the wind and the gathering darkness. She opened the envelope with trembling fingers. The handwriting inside was elegant, antiquated, each letter formed with precise care. "Welcome, Miss Thornwood. Ascend the stairs. The door will be open. Your quarters are prepared. We will speak at dinner." There was no signature, but she knew it could only be from the Count himself. She had never met her employer. The entire arrangement had been made through letters exchanged with a solicitor in Budapest, a man who seemed eager to place her as quickly as possible and never speak of the matter again. The stairs were slick with moss and melting ice. Elise climbed slowly, her breath misting in the cold air, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had accepted this position out of desperation, but now that she stood before the castle gates, desperation felt like a poor shield against the dread that crept through her bones. The door was indeed open, hanging slightly ajar, as if inviting her to step across a threshold she could never uncross. The entrance hall was vast and empty. Vaulted ceilings disappeared into shadow above her. Tapestries hung on the walls, their images faded and strange, depicting battles and feasts and figures that seemed neither fully human nor fully beast. Candles burned in iron sconces, but their light was weak and flickering, barely pushing back the darkness. The air smelled of old stone, dust, and something else she could not name, something metallic and faintly sweet. Her footsteps echoed as she ventured deeper into the hall. There was no one to greet her. No servants appeared to take her trunk or show her to her room. She called out, her voice small and uncertain, but received no answer except the whisper of wind through unseen corridors. For a moment she considered turning back, fleeing down the mountain before night fell completely. But where would she go? What life waited for her beyond these walls except more judgment, more failure, more emptiness? A door opened somewhere above her, the sound sharp in the silence. Elise looked up and saw him standing on the gallery that overlooked the entrance hall. He was tall and motionless, dressed in black, his face pale in the candlelight. Even from this distance, she felt the weight of his gaze, steady and penetrating, as if he could see through flesh and bone to the wounded thing inside her. Count Dracula descended the staircase with a grace that seemed almost unnatural, his movements fluid and silent. As he drew closer, Elise could see his face more clearly. He was handsome in an austere way, his features sharp and aristocratic, his dark hair swept back from a high forehead. His eyes were the most unsettling thing about him. They were dark and ancient, holding depths that made her feel like a child staring into a well with no bottom. He stopped before her and inclined his head in a gesture that belonged to another century. "Miss Thornwood, you have travelled far. I trust the journey was not too arduous." His voice was soft, cultured, with an accent she could not quite place. There was a formality to his speech that matched his appearance, as if he were performing a ritual whose steps he had learned long ago and never forgotten. "It was manageable, my lord," Elise replied, dropping into a curtsy that felt both appropriate and absurd in this empty, echoing place. "Thank you for your hospitality." The Count's lips curved into something that might have been a smile, though it held no warmth. Hospitality. "Yes. You will find that I have little use for the conventions of society, Miss Thornwood. There are no servants here to attend you, no social calls to endure, no expectations beyond those we establish between ourselves. I require someone to manage the household, to bring order to rooms that have known only decay. In return, you will have shelter, solitude, and freedom from the judgments of the world you have left behind." Elise felt her breath catch. How could he know? She had written nothing of her circumstances in her letters of application, nothing of the whispers or the shame, yet he spoke as if he had read every secret carved into her heart. "I'm grateful for the opportunity," she managed to say, though her voice wavered. The Count studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "You do not ask about the nature of this place. You do not question why a nobleman would live alone in a castle with no servants, no companions, no connection to the world beyond these mountains. Either you are braver than you appear, or you are more desperate." The words should have offended her, but they were spoken without cruelty, merely as observations of fact. Elise met his gaze and found herself answering with an honesty that surprised her. "Perhaps both, my lord." For the first time, something like interest flickered in the Count's eyes. He gestured toward the staircase. "Come, I will show you to your quarters. We will dine in 1 hour. There are matters we must discuss." He turned and began to ascend, and Elise had no choice but to follow. Her trunk remained in the entrance hall, forgotten. She climbed the stairs behind him, watching the way his shadow stretched and twisted in the candlelight, never quite matching the movements of his body. The corridors they passed through were labyrinthine, twisting and turning in ways that defied logic. She tried to memorize the route, but quickly lost track of the doors and passages that branched off into deeper darkness. Finally, the Count stopped before a heavy wooden door and pushed it open. "This will be your room. You will find everything you require. The wardrobe is stocked, the basin is filled. If you need anything else, you have only to speak aloud. I will hear you." Elise stepped into the room and the Count withdrew, closing the door behind him. She stood alone in the space that would be her home, her prison, her refuge. The room was large and sparsely furnished. A bed with dark velvet curtains, a writing desk, a wardrobe of black wood carved with strange symbols, a window that looked out over the valley. Where night was falling like a curtain over the world, she crossed to the window and pressed her hand against the cold glass. Below, the forest stretched endlessly, dark and silent. Above, the first stars were beginning to appear, cold and distant. She had traveled to the edge of the world, to a place where the rules of civilization no longer applied, and she had done so willingly. Because anything was better than the life she had left behind. Anything was better than being a failure in a world that measured a woman's worth by the children she could bear. A soft sound made her turn. It was faint, barely audible, like the whisper of fabric against stone. She listened, her heart beginning to race. The sound came again, closer now, accompanied by something else. A child's laughter, high and sweet and utterly wrong in this place of shadow and silence. Elise moved to the door and opened it cautiously. The corridor outside was empty, but the laughter continued, echoing from somewhere deeper in the castle. It was joined by other sounds now, the patter of small feet running, the murmur of voices too young and too numerous to belong in a castle with no servants and no inhabitants beyond herself and the Count. She should have stayed in her room. She should have locked the door and waited for dinner as instructed. But curiosity, and something deeper, something maternal and aching, pulled her forward. She followed the sounds through the winding corridors, guided by candlelight that seemed to flicker in rhythm with her heartbeat. The laughter grew louder, more insistent, leading her down a spiral staircase into a part of the castle that felt older and colder than the rest. At the bottom of the stairs was a door slightly ajar, with pale light spilling through the gap. Elise pushed it open and stepped into a vast chamber that must once have been a nursery. Broken toys littered the floor. Faded murals covered the walls, depicting children at play in gardens that no longer existed. And there, in the center of the room, illuminated by moonlight streaming through a shattered window, were the children. There were dozens of them, translucent and shimmering, their forms wavering like reflections in water. They ranged in age from toddlers to adolescents, dressed in clothing from different eras, their faces pale and hollow. They played silent games, chasing one another in circles, reaching for toys they could not touch. They were beautiful and terrible, innocent and damned. Elise's breath left her in a gasp. One of the children, a little girl with dark curls and a dress from centuries past, turned and looked directly at her. The child's eyes were sad beyond measure, filled with a longing that transcended death itself. She reached out one small hand toward Elise, her mouth forming words that made no sound. Behind Elise, a voice spoke, soft and heavy with sorrow. "They have been here for a very long time, Miss Thornwood. Longer than you can imagine." She spun to find the Count standing in the doorway, his expression more human than it had been before. There was pain in his eyes, ancient and raw, the pain of a man who had witnessed too much suffering and caused too much of it himself. "What are they?" Elise whispered, though she already knew the answer in her heart. The Count stepped into the room, and the children seemed to draw back from him, not in fear, but in recognition. They are the lost, the forgotten. Children claimed by plague and famine and war, by cruelty and neglect and the simple indifference of a harsh world. Their spirits could not move on. They were drawn here, to this place, to me. I did not summon them. I did not wish for them. But they came nonetheless, and I have not the power to release them. He looked at Elise then, and she saw in his face the same desperate emptiness that lived in her own chest. "You told the solicitor that you could not have children. That was why you accepted this position, was it not? Because you believed yourself a failure, because the world told you that a woman without children is incomplete." Elise felt tears burning in her eyes. She nodded, unable to speak. The Count's smile was sad and knowing. "Then perhaps we are both cursed in our own ways, Miss Thornwood. You cannot create life. I cannot end death. But here in this place, perhaps we might find some small purpose in caring for those who have neither." He turned and walked toward the door, pausing at the threshold. "Dinner will be served shortly. I suggest you compose yourself. Tomorrow you will begin your duties, and Miss Thornwood, do not be afraid of the children. They cannot harm you. They are merely lonely." He left her alone with the spirits, and Elise stood trembling in the moonlight, surrounded by the lost souls of innocence. Slowly, tentatively, she extended her hand toward the little girl who had reached for her. The child's spectral fingers passed through her own like mist, but for a moment Elise felt something, a warmth, a connection, a purpose that had nothing to do with blood or birth or the expectations of a society that had cast her aside. She sank to her knees on the cold stone floor, and the children gathered around her. Their translucent faces filled with hope and hunger. They could not touch her, but they could see her. They could know that someone, finally, was willing to look at them with love instead of horror. In that moment, Elise understood why she had been brought to this place. Not to keep house for a nobleman, not to hide from her shame, but to be a mother to those who had no one else. To offer tenderness to the abandoned, to prove that even in the darkest corner of the world, even in the presence of death itself, compassion could still bloom. She did not know yet what the Count truly was. She did not understand the nature of his curse or the price he had paid for his immortality, but she knew that she had found something here that she had never found in London, in her marriage, in all the empty years of her wasted life. She had found children who needed her, and that for now was enough. Elise did not sleep that first night. She lay in the velvet-draped bed, staring at the ceiling where shadows moved like living things, and listened to the sounds of the castle. Footsteps in distant corridors, whispers that might have been wind or might have been voices, the soft, rhythmic creaking of doors opening and closing in rooms she had not yet seen, and beneath it all, always, the faint echo of children's laughter, innocent and haunting. When dawn broke over the mountains, pale and cold, she rose and found that fresh clothing had been laid out for her, dark, practical dresses of fine wool and linen, suitable for a governess or housekeeper. There was no maid to help her dress, no servant to bring hot water for washing. Everything she needed simply appeared, as if the castle itself anticipated her requirements. She descended to the dining room, as the Count had instructed, and found him waiting at a long table set for two. In the morning light that filtered through the high windows, he looked even more otherworldly. His skin was pale as marble, without the flush of blood or warmth of life. He did not eat, she noticed. He sat with perfect stillness, a glass of red wine before him, watching her with those ancient, knowing eyes. "You slept poorly," he observed. It was not a question. Elise took her seat across from him, trying to steady her hands as she reached for the bread and cheese that had been laid out. "I heard things, sounds. The castle is old," the Count replied. "It remembers. Walls absorb the echoes of everything that happens within them. Laughter, weeping, screams. After centuries, those echoes become almost tangible." She forced herself to meet his gaze. "The children, are they always here? They do not leave. They cannot." His expression remained neutral, but she heard something in his voice that might have been regret. "They are bound to this place, as surely as I am. Perhaps more so. I, at least, can walk beyond these walls if I choose. They are trapped in the moment of their deaths, reliving their last hours again and again, searching for something they will never find." "What do they search for?" Elise asked softly. The Count lifted his glass, studying the deep red liquid within. Different things, their mothers, their homes, peace, forgiveness. Some simply wished to be remembered, to know that their brief lives mattered to someone. Elise set down the bread, her appetite gone. "How did they come to be here? Did you bring them?" For the first time, anger flashed across the Count's face, sharp and bitter. "I did not choose this. I did not ask to become a repository for lost souls. But when you live as long as I have, when you have taken as many lives as I have taken, death begins to follow you. The innocent dead most of all. They sense what I am. They are drawn to the darkness in me. And once they arrive, I cannot send them away." He drained his glass and stood abruptly, turning toward the window. "You asked me yesterday what you are to do here, Miss Thornwood. I will tell you plainly. I have tried for decades to ignore them, to pretend they do not exist. But their presence grows heavier with each passing year. They want something I cannot give them. Love, warmth, the simple comfort of being seen and valued. You have that capacity. I do not." Elise rose as well, her heart pounding. "You want me to care for ghosts. I want you to give them what they need, so that perhaps one day they might find rest." The Count did not turn to look at her. "In return, I offer you sanctuary, a place where your past does not matter, where you need not pretend to be anything other than what you are, And what am I? The question escaped before she could stop it. Now he did turn, and his gaze pinned her in place. A woman who loved children she could never have. A woman whose grief has made her brave enough to stay in a place that would terrify anyone with sense. A woman who, despite everything, still has enough compassion left to kneel before the dead and offer them kindness. Tears stung Elise's eyes. She blinked them back, refusing to let him see how deeply his words cut. "Very well, I will do what I can. But I do not know how to comfort spirits. I do not know what they need." "Then learn," the Count said simply. "You have time. We both do. More time than you can possibly imagine." He left her then, disappearing into the shadows of the castle with that unnatural grace. Elise stood alone in the dining room, surrounded by the remnants of a breakfast she had barely touched, and tried to understand the bargain she had made. She had come here seeking escape, but she had found something far stranger. A purpose she had never expected. A role that defied every rule she had been taught about life and death and the boundaries between them. She spent the rest of the morning exploring the castle. It was vast beyond comprehension, room after room filled with relics of ages past. Libraries stocked with crumbling books in languages she could not read. Armories hung with weapons that had tasted blood in wars long forgotten. Galleries lined with portraits of stern-faced nobles who stared down at her with disdain or sorrow or madness, and everywhere, in every corner and corridor, she felt the presence of the children. They did not appear during daylight. They remained hidden, waiting for dusk, but she could sense them watching. Sometimes she would enter a room and find toys arranged in patterns that had not been there before. Sometimes she would hear whispers just beyond the edge of hearing. They were testing her, she realized, trying to determine if she was truly safe, if she would stay, if she could be trusted. As afternoon faded into evening, Elise returned to the nursery. She brought with her candles, blankets, and a book of fairy tales she had found in one of the libraries. It was a foolish gesture, perhaps. The children could not touch physical objects, could not feel warmth or hear her voice in any normal sense, but she had to try. She lit the candles and arranged them around the room, pushing back the shadows. She spread the blankets on the floor and sat down, opening the book on her lap. And then she waited. They came as the last light died beyond the windows. First one, then two, then a dozen, materializing from the darkness like figures emerging from mist. They were clearer now than they had been the night before, their features more defined. She could see the individual stitches on their clothes, the patterns of freckles on their faces, the unique expressions that marked each small soul. The little girl with dark curls approached first, bolder than the others. She stood before Elise, her translucent form wavering slightly, and pointed at the book. Elise understood. She began to read aloud, choosing a story about a lost princess and a magical forest. Her voice was steady at first, then grew warmer as she found her rhythm. The children drew closer, forming a circle around her. They could not sit on the blankets, but they hovered just above them, their attention fixed on her face. She read until her voice grew hoarse, story after story, pausing only to turn pages. The children did not move, they did not make a sound. But their expressions changed, softening from the desperate hunger she had seen before into something calmer, something almost peaceful. When she finally closed the book, exhausted, the little girl with dark curls reached out again. This time, when her spectral hand passed through Elise's, there was a sensation like cool water, gentle and soothing. The child smiled, and for a moment she seemed more solid, more real, as if the simple act of being noticed had given her substance. "Thank you," Elise whispered, though she did not know why she was the one expressing gratitude. The children began to fade as midnight approached, drifting back into whatever liminal space they occupied when they were not visible. But before they vanished completely, each one paused before Elise, meeting her eyes, acknowledging her. She had given them something precious. She had treated them as if they mattered. She was alone again, sitting on the cold stone floor surrounded by candles and blankets when the Count appeared in the doorway. He had been watching, she realized, observing from the shadows to see if she would keep her word or flee in terror. "They trust you already," he said quietly. "That is remarkable. It took me decades to earn even their fear. You have won something more valuable in a single night." Elise pushed herself to her feet, her legs stiff and aching. "They are children. They need only to be seen, to be valued. It is not complicated." The Count stepped into the room, and she saw that his expression had changed. The cold mask he wore had cracked, revealing something raw beneath. "Do not mistake simplicity for ease, Miss Thornwood. What you offer them requires a strength I abandoned long ago. The ability to feel, to care, to risk your heart on something you cannot save." "Cannot save?" Elise repeated. "You said they need comfort so they can find rest. If I give them that, surely they can move on." The Count's smile was bitter. "You assume that love is enough to break a curse, that kindness can undo centuries of darkness. I admire your optimism. But this castle has stood for 500 years. These children have been trapped for almost as long. If salvation were possible, I would have found it by now." "Then what is the point?" Elise demanded, anger rising in her chest. "Why bring me here? Why ask me to care for them if there is no hope?" "Because hope is not the same as certainty," the Count replied. "Because even the damned deserve to know tenderness before the end. Because you need this as much as they do, whether you admit it or not." His words struck too close to truth. Elise turned away, blinking back tears. She had spent years being told she was broken, that her inability to bear children made her worthless, and now she stood in a cursed castle, caring for the ghosts of children who could never grow, never live, never be saved. It should have felt like another failure, another reminder of everything she lacked. But it did not. It felt like purpose, like the one thing she had always been meant to do. "I will continue," she said firmly. "Whether there is hope or not, they deserve better than to be ignored, and so do I." The Count studied her for a long moment, something unreadable in his ancient eyes. "Then you are either the bravest woman I have ever met, or the most foolish. Perhaps both." He moved toward the door, then paused. "There is something you should know, Miss Thornwood. I am not the only danger in this place. There are others who watch these mountains, others who would use you to get to me. If you choose to stay, you choose to live in the shadow of things far worse than ghosts." Elise lifted her chin. "I have already made my choice." The Count nodded slowly. "Then I will do what I can to keep you safe, but understand that my protection has limits. I am not a hero, Miss Thornwood. I am a monster who has learned to mimic civilization. Do not mistake courtesy for virtue." He left her then, and Elise was alone with the dying candles and the memory of small, desperate faces. She gathered the blankets and the book, carrying them back to her room. She would return tomorrow, and the night after that, and the night after that. For as long as she remained in this place, she would give these children what no one else could. She would love them, she would mourn them, she would remember their names and their faces, even if the world had forgotten them. And if that made her foolish, then so be it. Foolishness was better than the cold, practical cruelty of a society that measured worth in bloodlines and heirs. Here, in this castle of shadows and sorrow, she had found something that mattered more than propriety or expectations. She had found children who needed a mother, and she had found, in the darkest corner of her heart, the courage to become one, even if her children were dead, even if her love could never bring them back, even if the only thing she could offer was the simple, radical act of caring. It would have to be enough, for them and for her. The weeks passed in a rhythm that felt both strange and natural. Elise's days were spent managing the castle, though she quickly learned that the building seemed to care for itself in ways she could not explain. Dust did not accumulate. Candles replenished themselves. Food appeared in the kitchens, as if summoned by her needs alone. She suspected the Count's hand in these small magics, though he never spoke of them. Her nights belonged to the children. She read to them until her voice grew hoarse. She sang lullabies her own mother had sung to her when she was small. She told them stories of the world beyond the mountains, of cities and oceans and all the wonders they would never see. And slowly, impossibly, they began to respond, not with voices, for they had none, but with gestures and expressions that spoke more clearly than words ever could. She learned their names, or at least the names she gave them, since they could not speak their own. The little girl with dark curls became Catherine. A boy with serious eyes and ragged clothes became Thomas. A tiny child who could not have been more than 3 years old became Rose. There were 27 in total, each one unique, each one carrying the weight of a life cut short. The Count watched her work from the shadows, never interfering but always present. She had grown accustomed to his silent observations, to the way he appeared and disappeared like smoke. In the rare moments when they spoke, usually over the dinners he did not eat, she found herself drawn to the sadness that lived beneath his cold exterior. He was not cruel. He was simply ancient, worn down by centuries of loneliness and guilt. One evening, as she prepared to go to the nursery, he stopped her in the corridor. His expression was graver than usual, touched by something that might have been concern. "You have done well with them," he said without preamble. "Better than I dared hope. But there is something you must understand, Miss Thornwood. My presence here is not unknown. There are those who hunt me, who believe that destroying me will somehow restore balance to this cursed land." Elise felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold stone walls. "You mean vampire hunters?" The Count's smile was thin and humorless. "Among others. The church sends its soldiers. Villagers organize their mobs. And there are those of my own kind who resent my isolation, my refusal to join their games of power and bloodshed. Any of them might come. And when they do, you will be in danger simply by proximity. Then send me away," Elise said, though the thought of leaving the children made her chest tighten with panic. "No," the Count replied, and there was something fierce in his voice. "You will not leave, not unless you choose to. I have lived alone for too long, Miss Thornwood. I had forgotten what it meant to share this burden, to watch someone care for these lost souls with genuine compassion rather than duty or fear. I will not surrender that. But you must be prepared. If enemies come, you must hide. You must not try to defend me or appeal to their mercy. They will have none." Before Elise could respond, a sound cut through the night. A howl, low and savage, echoing across the mountains. It was answered by others, a chorus of predatory voices that made her blood run cold. The Count's expression darkened, his entire body tensing like a wolf scenting danger. "They are here," he said quietly, "sooner than I expected." He turned to Elise, his eyes burning with an intensity that was almost painful to meet. "Go to the nursery, gather the children. There is a chamber beneath it, hidden behind the bookshelf on the eastern wall. Take them there, and do not emerge until I come for you." "What is coming?" Elise demanded, even as fear clawed at her throat. "Lord Valerian," the Count replied, and his voice was filled with a hatred she had never heard from him before. "A vampire of the old blood, powerful, vicious, and utterly without conscience. He has wanted this castle for centuries. He believes that by destroying me, he can claim it and the power that resides here. He does not know about you. He must not discover you." The howls grew closer, accompanied now by the sound of wings beating against the night sky. The Count gripped Elise's shoulders, his hands cold but steady. "Listen to me carefully. Valerian is not like me. I have learned restraint. I have learned to exist without excess. He revels in cruelty. If he finds you, he will use you to torment me before he kills us both. You must hide. You must protect the children. Do you understand?" Elise nodded, her heart hammering. The Count released her and turned toward the entrance hall, his form already beginning to change. His fingers lengthened into claws. His teeth sharpened into fangs. The veneer of humanity he wore like a costume fell away, revealing the predator beneath. "Go!" he commanded, and his voice was no longer entirely human. Elise ran. She raced through the corridors, her skirts tangling around her legs, her breath coming in desperate gasps. Behind her, she heard the sound of wood splintering as the castle doors were torn from their hinges. Voices filled the entrance hall, cruel and mocking, speaking in a language she did not recognize. She burst into the nursery to find the children already manifested, their translucent forms flickering with agitation. They sensed the danger, she realized. They could feel the malevolence approaching. "Come with me," she whispered urgently, moving to the bookshelf the Count had described. She ran her hands along its edge until she found the hidden latch. The shelf swung outward, revealing a narrow staircase that descended into darkness. "Quickly, all of you, we must hide." The children hesitated. They had not left the nursery in all their years of haunting. But Catherine, the brave little girl with dark curls, moved first. She drifted toward Elise, and then down the stairs, and the others followed. Thomas took Rose's hand, guiding the smallest child. They descended in a solemn procession, trusting Elise to lead them to safety. The hidden chamber was small and cold, its walls carved from raw stone. Elise pulled the bookshelf closed behind them and stood in the darkness, her arms wrapped around herself, listening to the sounds of battle above. There were crashes and roars, the shriek of metal on stone, and voices raised in fury and pain. The castle itself seemed to shudder, as if the violence threatened its very foundations. The children pressed close to her, their spectral forms providing no warmth, but offering comfort nonetheless. She knelt among them, gathering them as close as she could, and began to sing. It was a lullaby, soft and soothing, meant to drown out the sounds of destruction. Her voice shook, but she forced herself to continue, to give the children something to focus on besides their fear. Time lost meaning in the darkness. She did not know how long the battle raged. It might have been minutes or hours. All she knew was the song, the children, and the desperate hope that the Count would survive. Finally, silence fell. It was absolute and terrifying, broken only by the ragged sound of her own breathing. Elise stopped singing and listened, straining to hear any sign of life above. Footsteps approached the nursery, slow and deliberate. The bookshelf began to move. She held her breath, ready to scream, to fight, to do anything to protect the children. But it was the Count who emerged from the darkness, his clothes torn and stained with blood, his face haggard, but alive. He looked at her with eyes that held both relief and something deeper, something she could not name. "It is over," he said quietly. "Valerian is gone, for now." Elise rose on trembling legs, the children clustering around her. "Are you hurt?" The Count glanced down at himself, as if only now noticing his wounds. Nothing that will not heal. He stepped into the chamber, and his gaze moved over the children, counting them, ensuring they were all safe. "You did well. You protected them." "I was terrified," Elise admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Fear is not weakness," the Count replied. "It is proof that you understand the stakes." He held out his hand to her. "Come, the castle will need to be secured, and you will need rest. Tomorrow will bring new challenges." She took his hand, and he led her up the stairs, the children following like a solemn parade. The nursery was untouched, but as they moved through the castle, Elise saw the devastation. Doors hung from broken hinges, tapestries had been torn from walls, bloodstains marked the floor in dark, spreading pools. "What did he want?" she asked as they walked. "Why attack you now?" The Count's expression was grim. He sensed a change. Something in the castle is different, stronger. He paused and looked at her directly. "It is you, Miss Thornwood. Your presence here has altered the balance. The children are calmer. The darkness is less oppressive." Valerian felt that shift and feared what it might mean. How could I possibly threaten a creature like him? "You do not threaten him," the Count said. "You threaten the despair that creatures like us feed upon. You bring hope to a place that has known only sorrow. That is more dangerous to him than any weapon." They reached her room, and the Count stopped at the threshold. He looked as if he wanted to say something more, but could not find the words. Finally, he simply inclined his head. "Sleep if you can. I will stand watch tonight. You are safe." Elise entered her room and closed the door, leaning against it as the terror and exhaustion of the night finally caught up with her. She had come to this castle, seeking escape, but she had found herself in the middle of a war she did not fully understand, a war between light and darkness, hope and despair, the living and the dead. And somehow, impossibly, she had become important in that war, not because of any power she possessed, but because she loved. Because she cared for the forgotten and offered kindness to the damned. It was a small thing, fragile and human, but in this place of ancient evils and eternal curses, it was enough to shift the balance. She crossed to the window and looked out at the mountains, where dawn was beginning to break. The night had been long and terrible, but they had survived. The children were safe, the Count endured, and she, Elise Thornwood, the childless widow who had believed herself worthless, had proven that even the smallest light could push back against the deepest darkness. She did not know what tomorrow would bring. More danger, certainly. More threats from enemies she could not hope to fight. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She would not abandon the children. She would not flee this castle. She would stay and fight with the only weapons she possessed: love, compassion, the stubborn refusal to let despair win. And if that was not enough, if darkness ultimately triumphed, at least she would know she had tried. At least she would know she had mattered to someone, even if that someone existed only as a ghost in a haunted nursery. It was more than she had ever hoped for in London, more than she had ever dared to dream. And for now, it was enough. The attack changed everything. The castle, which had felt like a sanctuary despite its strangeness, now felt like a fortress under siege. The Count doubled the wards around the property, ancient protections that hummed with power Elise could feel but not see. He spent hours walking the perimeter at night, his form dark against the moonlit snow, watching for enemies that might return at any moment. Elise threw herself into her work with the children with renewed urgency. If Valerian had sensed the change her presence brought, then perhaps that change was more important than she had realized. Perhaps there was real power in what she offered them. Not the supernatural strength of vampires or the holy righteousness of hunters, but something quieter and more fundamental. The power of being remembered, of being loved. She began to keep a journal, recording the details of each child. Catherine's favorite story was about a princess who could speak to birds. Thomas always positioned himself near the door, as if standing guard over the younger ones. Rose would not manifest unless the others were present, as if afraid to be alone. These small observations felt sacred, a way of anchoring their existence in something more permanent than memory. One evening, nearly a month after the attack, the Count joined her in the nursery. He had done this occasionally before, observing from the doorway, but tonight he entered fully and sat on the stone floor beside her. The children drew back at first, uncertain, but Catherine drifted closer, her translucent form wavering with curiosity. "They fear me less when you are here," the Count said quietly. His eyes were fixed on the little girl, and Elise saw something in his expression she had never seen before: longing. Not the predatory hunger of a vampire, but the simple human desire to connect. "They know you mean them no harm," Elise replied. "They sense it, even if they do not fully understand." The Count reached out slowly, extending his hand toward Catherine. The child hesitated, then moved closer, allowing her spectral fingers to pass through his. He closed his eyes, and Elise saw a tremor run through him. When he spoke again, his voice was rough with emotion. "I remember when she died. It was during the plague, 300 years ago. Her mother brought her to the castle begging for help. I had no cure to offer, no comfort. I watched her take her last breath in that woman's arms, and I felt nothing. I had already become too distant from humanity, too cold. But her spirit remained. They all remained. A reminder of every innocent life lost while I endured." Elise felt tears sting her eyes. "You are not as cold as you believe. If you were, you would not have brought me here. You would not sit with them now." The Count opened his eyes and looked at her. There was something raw in his gaze, something vulnerable that he usually kept hidden behind centuries of control. "You have changed me, Miss Thornwood. I did not think that was possible. I believed I was beyond redemption, beyond feeling anything but the endless weight of my curse. But you have reminded me of what I was before the darkness claimed me, and I do not know if that is a gift or a cruelty." Before Elise could respond, a sound cut through the night. Not the howls of wolves this time, but something equally threatening. Church bells ringing in the valley below, their toll carrying across the mountains with desperate urgency. The Count rose instantly, his body tensing, his expression hardening back into the mask of the predator. "What is it?" Elise asked, fear knotting in her stomach. "Hunters," the Count replied grimly. "The church has sent its soldiers." He moved to the window, looking down at the winding road that led to the castle. "I can see their torches. 20 men, perhaps more, led by a priest. Can you fight them?" The Count's smile was bitter. "I can kill them, but that will only confirm what they believe about me. It will bring more hunters, more armies, until this castle is nothing but ash and bone." He turned back to her, and she saw the calculation in his eyes, the cold assessment of a creature who had survived for centuries by knowing when to fight and when to flee. "There is another way. You must meet with them." Elise's heart lurched. "What? Why would they listen to me?" "Because you are human, because you are innocent, because if they see you alive and unharmed, they may believe that I am not the monster they have been told I am." The Count crossed to her, gripping her shoulders with an urgency that bordered on desperation. "Tell them you are my employee. Tell them I have treated you with courtesy and respect. Tell them whatever you must to make them leave peacefully. And if they do not believe me, if they demand to search the castle, then I will do what I must to protect you and the children," the Count said quietly. "But I would prefer to avoid that outcome. I am tired of killing, Miss Thornwood. I am tired of being the monster in their stories. If there is any chance for a different path, I must take it." Elise drew a shaky breath and nodded. "Very well, I will speak with them. But you must promise me something, anything. Promise me you will not harm them unless they give you no choice. Promise me you will try to be the man you were before the curse, not the creature you have become." The Count stared at her for a long moment, and she saw the war raging behind his eyes, the hunger, the rage, the ancient instinct to destroy anything that threatened him. But beneath all of that, she saw something else, the faint ember of the humanity he had thought lost forever. "I promise," he said at last, "but understand that if they threaten you, all promises are void. Your safety matters more to me than redemption." The words should have frightened her. Instead, they filled her with a warmth that had nothing to do with the cold stone walls around them. She nodded and turned toward the door, But Catherine moved to block her path. The little girl looked up at her with those sad, knowing eyes, and Elise understood. The child was afraid that Elise would not return, afraid that she would be abandoned again. "I will come back," Elise whispered, kneeling to meet Catherine's gaze. "I promise. I will always come back to you." The child stepped aside, and Elise left the nursery with the Count at her side. They descended through the castle in silence, moving toward the entrance hall, where the hunters would soon arrive. The Count positioned himself in the shadows near the staircase, invisible to anyone entering, but close enough to intervene if needed. "Wait here," he instructed. "Let them see you first. Let them believe you are alone and unthreatened. I will reveal myself only if necessary." The pounding on the door began moments later, heavy and insistent. Elise crossed the entrance hall, her heart hammering, and pulled open the door. 20 men stood on the steps, armed with torches, crossbows, and swords. At their head was a priest in black robes, his face gaunt and fierce, his eyes burning with righteous fury. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice sharp as broken glass. "Elise Thornwood," she replied, forcing her voice to remain steady. "I am the housekeeper of this castle." The priest's eyes narrowed. "You are English." "What is an Englishwoman doing in the service of a monster?" "Count Dracula is my employer," Elise said carefully. "He has shown me nothing but courtesy and respect. I have been here for 2 months, and I have not been harmed in any way." The priest stepped closer, studying her face as if searching for signs of enchantment or coercion. "I am Father Cornelius. I have hunted the undead for 20 years. And I have never encountered one who treats his victims with courtesy. You have been deceived, Miss Thornwood. The creature you serve is a devil who feeds on the innocent. He has likely placed you under a spell." "I am under no spell," Elise replied firmly. "I came here of my own free will. I remain here of my own free will. If you wish to enter and search the castle, I will allow it. But I ask that you treat my employer with the same respect you would show any nobleman." Father Cornelius's expression hardened. "A nobleman? He is an abomination! A sinner cursed by God to walk the earth as a parasite. He has no right to respect or mercy." From the shadows, the Count's voice emerged, cold and controlled. "And yet, Father, I have extended both to you and your men. I have not attacked you, though you have come armed to my home. I have not used my power to destroy you, though I could do so easily. Perhaps the abomination you speak of is more civilized than you credit." The priest spun toward the sound, his hand moving to the crucifix at his chest. The hunters raised their weapons, but the Count remained in the shadows, only his voice revealing his presence. "Show yourself, demon," Father Cornelius commanded. The Count stepped into the light, and Elise heard several of the hunters gasp. He looked every inch the aristocrat, dressed in his formal blacks, his posture regal and composed. But there was no hiding what he was. His pale skin, his unnatural stillness, the predatory grace of his movements, all marked him as something other than human. "I am Dracula," he said simply, "master of this castle. I have lived here for 5 centuries, and in that time I have learned that violence begets only more violence. I do not seek conflict with the church or with the people of this land. I seek only to exist in peace." "You cannot know peace," Father Cornelius spat. "You are damned. Your very existence is an affront to God." "Perhaps," the Count replied. "But if God truly found my existence intolerable, he would have destroyed me long ago. Instead, I endure, and I have tried in my own way to atone for the sins of my past. Miss Thornwood is not my prisoner. She is here because she chose to be, because I offered her something the world beyond these walls could not: purpose, sanctuary, freedom from judgment." The priest turned to Elise, his eyes blazing. "Is this true? You remain here willingly?" Elise met his gaze without flinching. "Yes, I remain willingly. The Count has not harmed me. He has not enchanted me. He has simply allowed me to do work that matters. What work could possibly matter in a house of the damned? Caring for the lost, Elise said quietly. The forgotten, those who have no one else. Father Cornelius frowned, confusion flickering across his face. What do you mean? Before Elise could answer, a sound drifted down from the upper floors, children's laughter, faint and ethereal, echoing through the corridors. The hunters shifted uneasily, their weapons wavering. The priest's face went pale. "What was that?" he whispered. The Count's expression remained neutral, but Elise saw the tension in his shoulders. "Ghosts, Father, the spirits of children who died in this land over the centuries. They are drawn here to this place because they cannot find rest. Miss Thornwood has taken it upon herself to care for them, to give them the comfort and love they were denied in life." "That is blasphemy," Father Cornelius said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Spirits should be exorcised, not coddled." "They are children," Elise said, stepping forward, "innocent souls who did nothing to deserve their fate. Would you condemn them to wander alone and afraid for eternity? Or would you allow someone to offer them kindness, even if that someone works in the household of a vampire?" The priest stared at her, his certainty crumbling. He looked at the Count, then back at Elise, then at his men, who were murmuring among themselves. Finally, he lowered his crucifix. "I will return," he said slowly. "I will consult with my superiors, but if I find evidence that you have been harmed, Miss Thornwood, or that innocents have suffered at this creature's hands, I will not hesitate to act." "I would expect nothing less," the Count replied. Father Cornelius turned and descended the steps, his hunters following. They disappeared into the night, their torches bobbing like fireflies down the mountain road. Elise closed the door and leaned against it, her entire body shaking with relief and exhaustion. The Count approached her, his expression unreadable. "You did well. Better than I dared hope." "I told them the truth," Elise said simply. "That is all." "The truth can be more powerful than any lie," the Count agreed. "But it has also made you a target, Miss Thornwood. Father Cornelius will investigate. He will seek to prove that you are either enchanted or complicit, and if he cannot be convinced otherwise, he will return with an army. Then we will face that when it comes," Elise replied. She looked up at him, meeting those ancient, weary eyes. "You kept your promise. You did not harm them. That matters." The Count reached out slowly, hesitantly, and touched her face. His fingers were cold, but his touch was gentle. "You give me too much credit. I am still the monster they believe me to be." "No," Elise whispered. "You are a man who has made terrible mistakes, but you are also a man who is trying to atone. That makes you more human than many I knew in London." For a moment, they stood there in the shadowed entrance hall, neither moving, neither speaking. The distance between them seemed both vast and impossibly small. Then the Count withdrew his hand and stepped back, the mask of control sliding back into place. "Go to the children," he said quietly. "They will need reassurance after the hunter's arrival. I will keep watch tonight." Elise nodded and turned toward the stairs, but paused before ascending. "Thank you," she said, "for trusting me to speak for you." The Count's smile was sad and knowing. "I trust you with far more than that, Miss Thornwood. I trust you with the only part of my soul that still remembers what it means to be human." He disappeared into the darkness, leaving Elise alone, with his words echoing in her mind. She climbed the stairs to the nursery, where the children waited, anxious and afraid. She gathered them close and told them stories until dawn broke over the mountains. And as she sang them lullabies that soothed spirits who could no longer sleep, she realized that she had fallen into something dangerous and beautiful, something that defied every rule she had been taught about propriety and safety and the boundaries between the living and the dead. She had begun to care for the Count as much as she cared for the children, and that terrified her more than any hunter or vampire ever could. The winter deepened, and with it came a silence that felt both peaceful and ominous. Father Cornelius did not return, but Elise knew he had not abandoned his investigation. The Count received reports from his few remaining contacts in the villages below. The church was gathering evidence, interviewing villagers, consulting ancient texts. They were building a case, and when they returned, it would be with overwhelming force. But in the castle, life took on a rhythm that felt almost normal. Elise continued her work with the children, and they responded in ways that defied her understanding of death and spirits. They grew more solid, more present, as if her love and attention were feeding something essential to their existence. Catherine could now hold the shape of objects for brief moments, her translucent fingers closing around toys that did not quite touch her. Thomas's voice occasionally manifested as a whisper, too faint to understand, but unmistakably real. Even little Rose began to venture from the nursery, following Elise through the corridors like a devoted shadow. The Count watched these changes with a mixture of hope and fear. He spent more time with Elise and the children, slowly breaking down the walls he had built over centuries. He taught her the history of the castle, the stories of the nobles who had lived and died within its walls. He showed her the library's hidden treasures, books written in dead languages that contained knowledge the world had forgotten. And in the quiet moments between lessons and stories, he spoke of his own past. Not the grand tale of Vlad the Impaler, the warlord who had become legend, but the smaller, more painful truths. The family he had lost, the woman he had loved before the curse. The slow erosion of his humanity as decades became centuries. One night, as they sat together in the library, a fire crackling in the hearth, the Count asked her a question she had been dreading. "What will you do when this ends, Miss Thornwood? When Father Cornelius returns with his army, when you are forced to choose between your safety and this place?" Elise set down the book she had been reading and met his gaze. "I will not leave the children. I will not abandon them to face whatever comes alone." The Count's expression was grave. "If you stay, you may die. The Church does not show mercy to those who consort with the damned. Then I will die," Elise said simply. "I have spent my entire life being told I was worthless because I could not fulfill the one purpose society demanded of me. Here, I have found a purpose that matters more than bloodlines or expectations. I have found children who need me, and I have found something else." She paused, her heart pounding, knowing that what she was about to say would change everything. "I have found a man who, despite his curse, treats me with more respect and kindness than anyone in my old life ever did. A man who has shown me that worth is not measured by what you can produce, but by how you choose to live with the burdens you carry." The Count stood abruptly, turning away from her. "Do not mistake my courtesy for virtue, Miss Thornwood. Do not romanticize what I am. I am a creature who has killed thousands, who has fed on the innocent and reveled in their terror. Whatever kindness I show you is a poor disguise for the monster beneath." "I have seen the monster," Elise replied quietly, rising to face him. "I saw it the night Valerian attacked. I saw the predator, the killer, the thing you believe yourself to be. But I also saw you sitting on the floor of the nursery, reaching out to a dead child with tears in your eyes. I saw you keep your promise to spare the hunters, even when it would have been easier to destroy them. You are not just a monster, Count Dracula. You are a man who has been monstrously cursed." The Count turned back to her, and she saw that his composure had finally cracked. The carefully maintained distance, the centuries of control, all of it fell away, leaving only raw, desperate emotion. "I cannot love you," he said, and his voice broke on the words. "I cannot offer you a life or a future. I cannot even promise you safety. All I can give you is darkness and danger and the slow poison of my existence." Elise crossed the space between them and took his cold hands in hers. "I'm not asking for a life or a future. I'm not asking for promises you cannot keep. I'm simply telling you that I see you, not the legend, not the monster. You, and I choose to stay." For a moment they stood there, hands clasped, the fire casting their shadows long across the ancient walls. Then the Count pulled her into his arms, holding her with a desperation that spoke of centuries of loneliness, of isolation so profound it had nearly destroyed him. Elise felt the coldness of his body, the absence of a heartbeat, all the physical markers of death. But she also felt the trembling of his hands, the ragged breath he did not need to take, the very human fear of losing something precious. They remained that way until the fire burned low and dawn threatened the horizon. No words were spoken. None were needed. They had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, and both of them knew it. The reckoning came 3 nights later. Elise woke to the sound of bells, dozens of them, ringing in unison across the valley. She rushed to the window and saw what she had been dreading. An army of hunters, perhaps 100 strong, marching up the mountain road with torches and crosses and weapons blessed by priests. At their head rode Father Cornelius, his face set with righteous determination. The Count appeared in her doorway, already dressed for battle. His expression was calm, but she saw the resignation in his eyes. He had known this moment would come. They both had. "Take the children to the hidden chamber," he instructed. "Seal yourselves inside. The wards there are the strongest in the castle. They may not be able to breach them." "And you?" Elise demanded, though she already knew the answer. "I will do what I have always done. I will fight. I will kill as many as I must to give you time. And when they finally destroy me, perhaps my curse will end, and the children will be free." "No," Elise said fiercely. "There has to be another way." The Count smiled, and it was filled with a tenderness that made her heart ache. "There is no other way, my dear. This was always how it would end. But you have given me something I did not expect to find in my final years: hope, and that is worth more than immortality." He turned to leave, but Elise grabbed his arm. "Wait! The children! What if they are the key?" The Count frowned. "What do you mean?" Elise's mind raced, pieces falling into place. "You said the children are bound here because they cannot find rest, because they were drawn to your darkness. But what if they could be released? What if the very thing that makes Father Cornelius believe you are evil could prove that you are trying to atone?" The Count's eyes widened with understanding. "If the children found peace and moved on, it would demonstrate that this place is not a den of evil, but a sanctuary for lost souls. It might not save me, but it could save you." "How do we do it?" Elise asked urgently. "How do we help them move on?" The Count was silent for a long moment, his ancient mind working through possibilities. "There is a ritual, an old one, from before Christianity claimed these lands. It requires a willing sacrifice. Someone must offer themselves as a bridge between the world of the living and the realm of the dead, allowing the spirits to pass through them to whatever lies beyond." "I will do it," Elise said immediately. "No!" the Count replied sharply. "The ritual is dangerous. It could destroy your soul, trap you between worlds, or worse. I will not risk you." The pounding on the castle doors began, heavy and relentless. They were out of time. "Tell me what to do," Elise demanded. The Count stared at her, and she saw the war raging in his expression. Finally he nodded. "Come with me, quickly." They ran through the corridors to the nursery, where the children were already manifesting, agitated by the violence approaching. The Count pulled back a rug, revealing a circle carved into the stone floor, surrounded by symbols in a language older than Latin. "Stand in the center," he instructed. "Call the children to you. Open your heart and your mind completely. Do not resist when you feel them passing through. No matter how much it hurts, do not resist." Elise stepped into the circle, her legs trembling. The children gathered around her, sensing that something important was happening. Catherine reached out her small hand, and this time, when Elise took it, she felt solid, real. The little girl's fingers were cold but tangible, as if the intensity of the moment had given her substance. The Count began to chant in a language that made the air vibrate and the candles flicker. The symbols on the floor began to glow with a pale, ghostly light. Elise felt something opening inside her, a doorway in her chest that led to somewhere vast and unknowable. The children began to move toward her one by one. As each spirit touched her, she felt their pain, their fear, their desperate longing for peace. It was overwhelming, a flood of emotion so intense she thought it might tear her apart. She gasped, her knees buckling, but forced herself to stay standing. Catherine was last. The little girl looked up at Elise with those sad, knowing eyes, and for the first time, she spoke. Her voice was faint as wind through leaves, but clear. "Thank you. Thank you for seeing us. Thank you for loving us." Then she stepped forward, and Elise felt the child pass through her like water through a sieve. There was a moment of unbearable cold, of darkness so complete it felt like drowning, and then suddenly, warmth. Light. Catherine's spirit emerged on the other side, no longer translucent but radiant, whole, free. She smiled once, brilliantly, then dissolved into golden motes that drifted upward and vanished. One by one, the others followed. Thomas, Rose, all 27 children passing through Elise, each one taking a piece of her strength until she was on her hands and knees, gasping, her body shaking with exhaustion, but they were free, all of them, released from the curse that had bound them for centuries. The Count knelt beside her, gathering her into his arms. "You did it," he whispered, his voice thick with awe. "You saved them." Elise could barely speak. Her entire body felt hollow, as if the children had taken something essential when they passed through. But she had never felt more whole, more complete, more certain that her life had mattered. The pounding on the door intensified, and then came the sound of wood splintering. The hunters had breached the castle. The Count carried Elise to the hidden chamber beneath the nursery and placed her gently on the stone floor. "Stay here," he commanded. "No matter what you hear, stay here until it is over." Before she could protest, he sealed the entrance. She was alone in the darkness, too weak to move, listening to the sounds of battle above. But this time, it was different. This time, she heard voices raised not in anger, but in confusion. She heard Father Cornelius shouting orders, then silence, then what sounded like weeping. Hours passed, or perhaps only minutes. Time had lost all meaning. Finally, the bookshelf moved, and light flooded the chamber. But it was not the Count who stood there. It was Father Cornelius, his face streaked with tears, his expression transformed. "Miss Thornwood," he said, his voice hoarse, "what happened here? What did you do?" Elise pulled herself upright with effort. "We freed the children. We gave them peace." Father Cornelius shook his head in wonder. "We felt it, all of us. A wave of light and love so powerful it drove us to our knees. I have hunted the undead for 20 years, and I have never felt the presence of God so clearly as I did in that moment." He looked at her with something like reverence. "You performed a miracle in the house of a demon." "Not a demon," Elise said quietly. "A man who was cursed and tried to atone." The priest helped her to her feet and guided her up to the nursery. The room was empty now, truly empty, devoid of the spectral presence that had haunted it for centuries. The Count stood at the window, his back to them, his shoulders tense. Father Cornelius approached him slowly. "I do not understand what I witnessed, Count Dracula, but I cannot deny that something holy occurred here, that souls found salvation in a place I believed was beyond redemption." The Count turned, and Elise saw that his face was different, softer, more human. The release of the children had affected him as deeply as it had affected her. "I am still what I am, Father," he said quietly. "I am still cursed, still damned, but perhaps damnation does not preclude the possibility of doing good." Perhaps even the lost can serve a purpose. Father Cornelius studied him for a long moment, then slowly, deliberately lowered his crucifix. "I will return to Rome," he said. "I will report what I have seen. I cannot promise that the Church will leave you in peace, but I will speak in your defense. I will tell them that Count Dracula, whatever his sins, has proven that even the damned can be instruments of grace." He turned to his men, who stood in the corridor, their weapons lowered, their faces reflecting the same confusion and awe. "We are leaving," he announced. "There is nothing evil here to destroy." The hunters filed out slowly, many of them making the sign of the cross, but not in fear or aggression. In respect, in acknowledgement of something they did not fully understand, but could not deny. When they were gone, Elise and the Count stood alone in the nursery, the space feeling vast and empty without the children they had both come to love. "What now?" Elise asked softly. The Count took her hand, his touch no longer cold, but merely cool. "Now we live," he said, "however we can, for however long we are given. You have changed me, Elise Thornwood. You have reminded me that existence, even cursed existence, can have meaning if we choose to fill it with love instead of despair." Elise looked around the empty nursery, remembering the faces of the children, their laughter, their desperate need to be seen and valued. "They are gone," she whispered. "I miss them already." "As do I," the Count agreed. "But they are at peace, and that is more important than our comfort." He turned to her, his expression serious. "You could leave now. Return to England. Build a new life without the shadow of this place hanging over you." Elise shook her head. "I told you before, I choose to stay, not because I am enchanted or trapped, but because this is where I belong, with you, in this castle, doing whatever good we can in the time we have." The Count pulled her close, and she rested her head against his chest, no longer bothered by the absence of a heartbeat. They stood together as dawn broke over the mountains, light streaming through the windows, illuminating the empty nursery that would now serve a different purpose. Not a prison for lost souls, but a reminder that even in the darkest places love could bloom, that even the damned could find moments of grace, that a childless woman and a cursed immortal could create a family from nothing but compassion and desperate hope. In the months that followed, other spirits came, not children, but lost souls of all kinds, drawn to the light that now emanated from the castle. Elise welcomed them, cared for them, helped them find peace. The Count stood beside her, using his power not to harm but to protect, creating a sanctuary in the mountains where the forgotten and forsaken could find rest. Father Cornelius kept his word. The Church did not send another army. Villagers began to speak of the castle not with fear, but with cautious respect. Some even made pilgrimages, seeking help for loved ones whose spirits could not rest. And though Elise never bore children of her own flesh, she became a mother to hundreds of lost souls. She gave them the one thing they needed most: to be remembered, to be loved, to matter. The Count had once said that he had enough children for both of them, and he had been more right than he knew. Not children of blood and birth, but children of the spirit, each one precious, each one worth saving. On quiet nights, when the work was done and the castle settled into peaceful silence, Elise and the Count would sit together in the library, her hand in his, watching the fire burn low. They spoke little. There was no need. They had found what they had both been searching for without knowing it. Not redemption, perhaps, for some sins were too great to be fully absolved, but something equally valuable: purpose, connection, the knowledge that even broken things could be made beautiful if handled with enough care. Elise never regretted her choice. Not when winter storms raged and the castle groaned under the weight of ice and snow. Not when new threats emerged and had to be faced. Not when she felt the years passing and knew that her mortal life would end while his continued on forever, because she had learned the truth that society had tried to deny her, that a woman's worth was not measured by the children she bore, but by the love she gave. That family was not defined by blood, but by choice. That even the darkest curse could be transformed into something meaningful if you refused to surrender to despair. She had come to Castle Dracula as a broken woman fleeing judgment and shame. She remained as a woman who had found her strength in the most unlikely place, in caring for the dead, in loving the damned, in proving that compassion was more powerful than any curse. And when her mortal life finally ended decades later, surrounded by the spirits she had helped and the man she had chosen, her last thought was one of profound gratitude. She had been told she could not have children, but she had been a mother to hundreds. She had been told she was worthless, but she had changed the fate of countless souls. The Count had smiled at her confession all those years ago and said he had enough children for both of them. And in the end, he had given her exactly what she needed. Not biological heirs or societal approval, but a family built on love that transcended the boundaries between life and death. It was enough, more than enough. It was everything.